The sky wept tears of ice as Warren Keller trudged through knee-deep snow, his desperate cries for Eliza swallowed by the howling Montana blizzard of 1878. 20 paces from their homestead, and he could barely see his own hand in front of his face, let alone find his wife who had gone to check on their livestock just before the storm hit with unexpected fury. Warren had been a cattle rancher for 15 years, weathering the harsh conditions of the frontier with stubborn determination. At 38, the lines etched into his sun-weathered face told stories of drought, rustlers, and long cattle drives. But nothing had prepared him for the ferocity of this particular winter storm, or the hollow ache that now consumed him as he stumbled through the white void calling his wife's name. Eliza! His voice cracked with desperation. Eliza, where are you? The wind sliced through his heavy coat as if it were made of paper. His fingers, despite thick leather gloves, had gone numb. Logic told him to turn back before he too became lost in the blinding white, but his heart pushed him forward. Eliza was out there somewhere. After another hour of searching, with frostbite threatening and daylight fading, Warren made the heart-wrenching decision to return to their cabin. Perhaps she had found her way back while he was searching. Perhaps she had taken shelter in the barn. Perhaps. The cabin stood dark and empty, exactly as he had left it. The barn revealed only nervous cattle and horses, but no sign of his wife. Warren collapsed against a stall door, his body trembling from cold and fear. Eliza was still out there, somewhere in the merciless white. For 3 days the blizzard raged. For 3 days, Warren ventured out whenever the wind abated slightly, searching desperately for any sign of Eliza. On the 4th day, when the storm finally broke and the sun cast its pale light across a transformed landscape, he found her. She lay peaceful, as if sleeping, partially covered by snow, near the creek that ran along the edge of their property. Her skin was blue-tinged and still. No breath fogged the crisp morning air. Warren fell to his knees beside her, gathered her frozen body in his arms, and released a primal howl of grief that echoed across the snow-covered plains. Eliza Keller was buried on a hilltop overlooking their ranch, beneath soil so frozen it had taken Warren 2 days to dig deep enough for a proper grave. He marked it with a wooden cross, carved with shaking hands. The day he placed wildflowers on the fresh mound, something inside him hardened and died alongside his wife of 12 years. The months that followed passed in a blur of mindless work and sleepless nights. Warren threw himself into the ranch, rising before dawn and working until his body gave out from exhaustion. The neighboring ranchers worried for him, this shell of a man who barely spoke, never smiled, and seemed to exist solely to work himself into an early grave. Spring came and went. Summer blazed across the Montana Territory, turning the landscape golden. Autumn painted the cottonwoods along the creek in brilliant yellow before giving way to winter's first frost. 1 year after Eliza's death, Warren still lived like a ghost in his own home, going through the motions of survival without truly living. December 1879 brought another winter, though thankfully milder than the previous year. Warren had just returned from checking fence lines when he saw the unfamiliar wagon approaching his homestead. Visitors were rare this time of year, especially with the threat of snow hanging in the leaden sky. The wagon drew closer, revealing a young woman at the reins. Warren stood motionless by his corral, hat pulled low against the biting wind, watching with detached curiosity as she navigated the rutted path to his cabin. "Mr. Keller?" she called out, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Warren Keller?" Warren nodded stiffly, studying the stranger. She couldn't have been more than 25, with copper-colored hair peeking out from beneath her bonnet and a determined set to her jaw. "I'm Felicity Garner," she said, climbing down from the wagon with practiced ease. "I've taken over the Simmons place, about 5 miles east. My uncle owned it." Warren vaguely recalled hearing that old Jeb Simmons had passed away in the fall. He hadn't known the man well just enough to nod in greeting when their paths crossed in town. "I've brought you something," Felicity continued, seemingly undeterred by his silence. She reached into the back of her wagon and produced a covered pot. "Beef and barley soup. Mrs. Peterson in town mentioned you might appreciate a hot meal, what with the anniversary and all." Warren stiffened. So that's what this was, charity disguised as neighborly kindness. The anniversary of Eliza's death was just 3 days away, and apparently the whole town still viewed him as the object of pity. "Don't need handouts," he said gruffly, turning toward his cabin. "It's not a handout, Mr. Keller," Felicity called after him, her voice sharp enough to stop him in his tracks. "It's what neighbors do, and whether you like it or not, we're neighbors now." Something in her tone, not sympathy, but a straightforward practicality, made Warren turn back. Felicity Garner stood with the steaming pot in her gloved hands, her green eyes meeting his without flinching. "My house is cold," he said finally, the closest thing to an invitation he could manage. "I can tell," she replied, glancing at the thin wisp of smoke coming from his chimney. "When's the last time you properly stoked that fire?" Without waiting for an answer, she marched past him toward the cabin, her skirts swishing with purpose. Warren stood dumbfounded for a moment before following her inside. The interior of the cabin was neat, but sparse, a testament to Warren's minimal existence. Felicity placed the pot on the cold stove and immediately set about building up the fire, her movements efficient and practiced. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to the table as she worked. "This place is like an icebox." Warren found himself obeying, watching in bewilderment as this stranger took command of his home. Within minutes, the fire was crackling properly, and she was ladling soup into the only clean bowl she could find. "Eat while it's hot," she said, placing the steaming bowl before him. The rich aroma hit Warren like a physical blow. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something that smelled so good. His usual meals consisted of whatever required the least effort: beans from a can, hardtack, occasionally game when hunting was necessary. Tentatively, he took a spoonful. The flavor burst on his tongue, savory, complex, comforting. He took another spoonful and another, suddenly aware of a gnawing hunger he'd been ignoring for months. Felicity bustled around the cabin as he ate, tidying things with brisk efficiency. She didn't speak, didn't ask the questions everyone else did about how he was coping, if he needed anything, if he'd considered moving on. Her silence was a relief. Only when the bowl was empty did Warren remember his manners. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "It was good." Felicity paused in her tidying. "You're welcome, Mr. Keller." "Warren," he corrected automatically, surprising himself. She nodded. "Warren, then. There's more in the pot. Enough for tomorrow, too, if you heat it proper." Warren studied her, really looked at her for the first time. Felicity Garner was not conventionally beautiful, but there was something striking about her, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, a directness in her gaze that most women of his acquaintance lacked. "You're running the Simmons place alone?" he asked. "I am." Her chin lifted slightly, as if expecting challenge. "Uncle Jeb left it to me. I was his only kin, and I've worked ranches since I was a girl." "It's hard country for anyone alone," Warren said, thinking of his own struggles since Eliza's death. "I'm aware." Her tone was clipped. "But I'm not afraid of hard work, and I know cattle. I hired 2 Hands brothers from Texas and we're managing." The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Finally, Felicity moved toward the door. "I should get back before dark," she said, reaching for her coat. "Weather's turning." Warren rose, suddenly reluctant to see her go. "I appreciate the soup," he said awkwardly. "And the fire." Felicity paused with her hand on the door latch. "My mother always said good soup can heal most troubles." A small smile flickered across her face. "Maybe not all, but it's a start." With that, she was gone, leaving Warren standing in his now warm cabin, feeling something he couldn't quite identify, a small crack in the frozen wasteland of his grief. The next day found Warren riding toward the Simmons place before he'd fully reasoned out why. He told himself it was simple courtesy returning the pot and properly thanking her for the meal. But as his horse crested the ridge that overlooked the Simmons ranch, he admitted to himself that he was curious about Felicity Garner. The ranch looked different than he remembered. The house and outbuildings had been freshly painted, the corral mended, new fence posts marking boundaries. Signs of industry and care were everywhere. As he approached, one of the hired hands, a lanky young man with a shock of blonde hair, hailed him from the barn. "Afternoon. You looking for Miss Garner?" Warren nodded, dismounting. "Is she around?" "In the house, I reckon." The young man grinned. "I'm Levi Thornton. My brother Noah and I work for Miss Garner." "Warren Keller," he replied, offering his hand. "From the big spread west of here?" Levi's handshake was firm. "Miss Garner mentioned visiting you yesterday." Warren nodded again, unsure what else to say. Social niceties had never been his strong suit, even before Eliza's death had turned him practically mute. "I'll take your horse if you want to head on up to the house," Levi offered. Warren handed over the reins and walked toward the two-story farmhouse, the empty soup pot clutched awkwardly in his hand. He hadn't even reached the porch when the front door opened and Felicity appeared, wiping her hands on an apron dusted with flour. "Mr. Keller," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" "Warren," he corrected again. "And yes, just returning your pot. And thanking you properly for the soup." Felicity's expression softened slightly. "Come in then. I've just put bread in the oven." The interior of the Simmons house had changed as much as the exterior. Gone were the sparse bachelor furnishings Warren vaguely remembered. The main room now held a comfortable-looking sofa, brightly colored quilts, shelves lined with books, and curtains at the windows. It looked like a home. "Have a seat," Felicity gestured to the kitchen table. "Coffee?" Warren nodded, placing the pot on the counter. "You've done a lot with the place." "It needed it," she replied simply, pouring coffee into a mug. "Uncle Jeb wasn't much for decorating or comfort." "You knew him well?" Felicity placed the coffee before him and sat down across the table. "Well enough. He visited us in Kansas every few years. When my parents died of influenza 4 years ago, he offered to take me in, but—" She shrugged. "I had my teaching position and my independence. I wasn't ready to move to Montana to keep house for an old bachelor, uncle or not." Warren sipped his coffee, noting it was strong and good. "You were a teacher?" "For 6 years." Pride flickered in her eyes. "I taught at a school in Topeka. Saved every penny I could. When Uncle Jeb passed and left me the ranch, it seemed like fate. I'd always loved visiting Montana as a girl. Teaching to ranching is quite a change." "I grew up on a ranch," she said. "My father taught me everything he knew before I was 16. The teaching was my mother's influence. She insisted I get an education, have options." Felicity's fingers traced the rim of her own coffee cup. "I love teaching, but this, having my own land, my own cattle, this was always the dream." Warren studied her across the table. There was a quiet confidence about Felicity Garner that he found himself respecting. Most women would consider a remote Montana ranch a hardship, not a dream. "It won't be easy," he said finally. "Winters here can kill cattle and hopes alike." Something flashed in Felicity's eyes, a mixture of determination and something darker. "I'm aware of what winter can take from a person, Mr. Keller." The weight of her words hung between them. Warren wondered suddenly if Felicity had her own losses, her own ghosts. Before he could respond, the oven timer chimed. Felicity rose gracefully and removed a golden brown loaf of bread, its aroma filling the kitchen. She sliced it while it was still steaming, placed a thick piece on a plate with a generous pat of butter, and set it before him. Try it while it's hot, she said, her tone lightening. Fresh bread cures almost as many ills as soup. Warren took a bite, closing his eyes briefly at the simple pleasure. It had been so long since he'd had homemade bread. It's good, he said, opening his eyes to find her watching him with an unreadable expression. Thank you. She hesitated, then asked, Have you eaten anything besides the soup since yesterday? Warren felt a flush of embarrassment. The truth was, he hadn't. The remainder of the soup had been his breakfast, and he'd been planning on opening a can of beans for dinner. His silence was answer enough. Felicity sighed, a sound somewhere between exasperation and concern. The Thornton brothers and I are having roast beef for dinner, she said decisively. There's plenty. You'll stay. It wasn't a question, and Warren found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the invitation. Something about Felicity Garner made it difficult to refuse her. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. The Thornton brothers were good-natured and talkative, spinning tales of their adventures driving cattle from Texas that had everyone, even Warren, laughing. Felicity served a meal that put Warren's cooking attempts to shame. Roast beef with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and an apple pie for dessert. As they ate, Warren observed the easy camaraderie between Felicity and her hired hands. They clearly respected her, deferring to her opinion on ranch matters while treating her with a brotherly affection that seemed to please her. Miss Garner's got plans to expand the north pasture come spring, Noah Thornton explained around a mouthful of pie. Gonna add another 50 head if we can find good stock. The Harrington place might have cattle for sale, Warren found himself saying. Their youngest son broke his leg bad last month. They're short-handed and talking about reducing their herd before winter fully sets in. Felicity's eyes lit up with interest. That's good to know. Thank you. Could ride over with you to take a look if you want, Warren offered, surprising himself again. I know Jim Harrington. He's fair, but he'll try to offload his poorer stock first if he thinks you don't know better. I'd appreciate that, Felicity said, a genuine smile transforming her face. Warren felt something shift inside him, like ice breaking up on a spring river. It had been so long since he'd offered help to anyone, so long since he'd thought beyond his own grief and daily survival. As the evening wound down and Warren prepared to leave, Felicity walked him to his horse, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Thank you for coming, she said quietly, and for offering to help with the cattle. Warren mounted his horse, looking down at her in the fading light. Least I could do after that meal. Haven't eaten like that in, well, a long time. Felicity studied him for a moment. You know, I make bread every other day. More than the three of us can eat. I could have Levi drop some by your place when he's checking our west fence line. Pride warred with practicality in Warren's mind. I wouldn't want to put you out. It's not putting me out if I'm offering, she said simply. Besides, neighbors help neighbors out here. That's what my uncle always said about Montana. Warren nodded slowly. All right then. Thank you. As he rode home under a sky full of stars, Warren realized he'd spoken more words that evening than he had in the entire past month. Somehow, Felicity Garner had drawn him out of his shell without even seeming to try. And for the first time in a year, he went to sleep thinking about someone other than Eliza. True to her word, Levi Thornton appeared at Warren's ranch 2 days later with a basket containing 2 loaves of bread, a jar of preserves, and a note from Felicity suggesting they ride to the Harrington place the following day if Warren was still willing. Warren found himself shaving carefully the next morning, something he'd grown careless about during his year of solitude. He put on his best shirt and his least worn coat before riding to meet Felicity at her ranch. She was ready when he arrived, dressed practically in a split riding skirt and sturdy jacket, her copper hair braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. You clean up nice, Mr. Keller, she remarked with a hint of a smile as he dismounted. Warren, He reminded her for the third time, feeling a flush creep up his neck. Warren, she agreed, her eyes twinkling. Shall we? The ride to the Harrington Ranch took the better part of 2 hours, during which Warren found himself gradually drawn into conversation. Felicity asked intelligent questions about the local terrain, water rights, which grasses were best for fattening cattle, and which ranchers in the area might be willing to partner on future cattle drives. You've thought this through, Warren commented as they crested a hill overlooking the Harrington spread. I've had a year to plan, Felicity replied. When Uncle Jeb wrote that he was ailing, I knew there was a chance I'd inherit. I spent that time learning everything I could about modern ranching techniques. Sent away for agricultural journals, corresponded with successful ranchers in Kansas. Warren shook his head, impressed despite himself. Most women wouldn't consider taking on a ranch alone. Felicity gave him a sidelong glance. Most women aren't me, Mr. Keller. Warren, he corrected automatically, earning a genuine laugh from Felicity that warmed something long cold inside him. At the Harrington Ranch, Warren was pleased to see Jim greet Felicity with respect, rather than the condescension many men showed to women in business matters. Jim's son Thomas, the one with the broken leg, turned out to have a keen eye for cattle bloodlines and had meticulously documented the herd's breeding history. These records are impressive, Felicity remarked, poring over the ledger Thomas showed her. I can see which bloodlines produce the hardiest calves. Thomas beamed at the praise. Pa says I've got a mind for breeding, planning to expand on it when this leg heals. After examining the cattle personally and confirming Thomas's records matched the actual stock, Felicity negotiated a fair price for 30 head, mostly young females from the best bloodlines, with 2 bulls thrown in. We can deliver them next week, Jim offered, clearly pleased with the transaction. My hands and I can drive them ourselves, Felicity countered. Save you the trouble. I'd like to see how they handle on the trail anyway. Jim looked to Warren, who nodded slightly. She knows what she's doing, he said simply. As they rode back toward Felicity's ranch, Warren found himself studying her profile against the late afternoon sky. There was something captivating about her confidence, her clear vision for her future. You handled that well, he said finally. Got a good price, too. Felicity smiled, clearly pleased with the day's work. Thank you for coming along. Having a respected rancher with me certainly didn't hurt. Warren felt an unexpected surge of pride at her words. It had been a long time since he'd felt like a respected rancher, rather than a grief-stricken shadow. Happy to help? He said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I could ride along when you go to collect the cattle. An extra hand wouldn't hurt for that many head. Felicity glanced at him, surprise and something warmer in her expression. I'd appreciate that, Warren. Truly. When they reached her ranch, she invited him in for coffee and pie. The easy conversation continued as the sun set, turning to stories of their respective childhoods. Warren's in Pennsylvania before his family moved west, Felicity's in Kansas on her parents' modest ranch. My father wanted sons, Felicity explained, pouring more coffee. Got 3 daughters instead. My sisters were content with needlework and cooking, but I followed Pa everywhere, pestering him to teach me ranching. Eventually he gave in. He'd be proud to see you now, Warren said softly. Felicity's eyes shimmered briefly. I like to think so. She cleared her throat. What about your family? Do they know about what happened last year? Warren stiffened slightly. It was the first direct reference either had made to Eliza's death. My parents passed years ago, he said after a moment. Have a brother in California. Wrote to him after the funeral. Felicity nodded, not pushing further. Instead, she changed the subject, telling him about her plans for improving the ranch's water system come spring. It was fully dark when Warren finally rose to leave. At the door, Felicity hesitated, then said, "I'm making a proper Sunday dinner tomorrow. Chicken and dumplings. You'd be welcome to join us." Warren found himself accepting before he'd consciously decided to do so. As he rode home under a blanket of stars, he realized with a start that he was looking forward to tomorrow. The sensation was so foreign after a year of merely enduring each day that it took him a moment to recognize it. Sunday dinner became a regular occurrence over the following weeks, as did Warren's assistance with various ranch projects at the Simmons place. He helped the Thornton brothers reinforce the barn roof before the heavy snows came, fixed a troublesome pump that had been giving Felicity grief, and rode with them to collect the cattle from the Harrington ranch. In return, Felicity regularly sent bread, stew, or pies home with him. Occasionally, she'd ride over herself, usually with the excuse of bringing food or asking his advice on some ranch matter. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories that threatened to drag Warren back into the depths of his grief. Eliza had loved Christmas, the decorations, the baking, the carols. Last year, he'd ignored the holiday entirely, working from dawn until dusk on Christmas Day as if it were any other. 3 days before Christmas, Warren was chopping firewood when he saw Felicity's wagon approaching. She had a large bundle in the back, covered with a tarp. "Afternoon," she called as she drew near. "I've brought you something." Warren set down his axe, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "More food?" he asked, the faintest hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Not exactly." Felicity climbed down, gesturing to the bundle. "Come see." Warren approached the wagon, helping her pull back the tarp to reveal a small pine tree. "A Christmas tree," Felicity explained unnecessarily. "I thought, well, your cabin could use some cheer." Warren stared at the tree, a complex mixture of emotions churning within him. Eliza's face flashed in his mind, her delight each year when they brought in a tree, her careful unpacking of the few ornaments they owned. "I can't," he said hoarsely, stepping back. Felicity's face fell slightly, but she rallied quickly. "Of course. I shouldn't have presumed. I'll take it back." "No." Warren's hand shot out, catching her arm gently. "I mean, I don't have decorations. Eliza's were. I packed them away. Haven't found the courage to look at them since." Understanding dawned in Felicity's eyes. "I brought some," she said softly. "Nothing fancy. Pine cones, ribbon, some dried berries. We could make new memories, Warren. It doesn't dishonor old ones to find joy again." Something broke open inside Warren than a dam he'd built against his grief, against feeling anything at all. He turned away quickly, but not before Felicity saw the tears gathering in his eyes. She didn't speak, just moved to stand beside him, her shoulder barely touching his arm. They stood that way for several minutes, Warren fighting for composure while Felicity offered silent support. Finally, he cleared his throat. "All right," he said roughly. "Let's bring it in." Together, they carried the small pine into Warren's cabin and set it up in the corner. Felicity produced a bag of simple decorations, pine cones dusted with flour to look like snow, red berries strung on thread, strips of red and green fabric tied into bows. As they worked, Felicity hummed Christmas carols softly. Warren found himself watching her more than the tree, fascinated by the gentle concentration on her face as she arranged each decoration just so. When the last ornament was placed, Felicity stepped back with a satisfied smile. "What do you think?" Warren looked at the tree, then at the woman beside it. In the golden light of the oil lamp, with her cheeks flushed from the work and her eyes bright with pleasure, Felicity Garner was beautiful. "Perfect," he said quietly, meaning more than just the tree. Something shifted in Felicity's expression, a softening, a moment of vulnerable hope quickly masked. "Well," she said, her voice slightly breathless, "I should be getting back. It'll be dark soon." "Stay for supper," Warren heard himself say. "I'm not much of a cook." but I can manage bacon and eggs. Felicity hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. They prepared the simple meal together, moving around Warren's small kitchen with surprising ease. The conversation flowed naturally as they ate, touching on ranch matters before drifting to books they'd read, places they'd like to visit someday. I've always wanted to see the ocean, Felicity admitted. Uncle Jeb described it, once said it goes on forever, further than the eye can see. It does, Warren confirmed. Saw the Atlantic as a boy before we came west. Nothing quite like it. Maybe someday, Felicity said wistfully. When the ranch is established properly and running smoothly. You could take a train to San Francisco, Warren suggested. The Pacific's different from the Atlantic wilder somehow. Would you? Felicity hesitated, then plunged ahead. Would you want to see it again someday? The question hung between them, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Warren found himself considering possibilities he hadn't thought about in over a year, a future beyond merely surviving. Maybe, he said softly. Someday. When Felicity finally prepared to leave, the night had grown bitterly cold. Warren insisted on riding alongside her wagon to ensure she reached home safely. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, the moonlight casting everything in silver. At her door, Felicity turned to him with a smile. Thank you for accepting the tree, and for dinner. Thank you for... Warren searched for the right words. For bringing Christmas back. Impulsively, Felicity reached out and squeezed his hand. Christmas Eve dinner is at my place. Nothing fancy, but the Thorntons are bringing a fiddle, and there might be singing. You'll come? Warren looked down at their joined hands, then back to Felicity's hopeful face. I'll be there, he promised. The ride home was cold, but Warren barely noticed. For the first time since losing Eliza, he felt a spark of something that might, with care, grow into happiness. Christmas Eve at Felicity's ranch was everything she had promised. The house glowed with warmth and candlelight, a fire roared in the hearth, and delicious smells filled the air. The Thornton brothers had invited 2 young women from a neighboring farm, and the small gathering was lively with conversation and laughter. After dinner, Noah Thornton produced his fiddle as promised, playing lively tunes that had everyone clapping along. His brother Levi convinced one of the young women to dance, and soon the furniture was pushed back to make space for others to join in. Warren sat beside Felicity, watching the impromptu dancing with a small smile. When Noah shifted to a slower waltz, Felicity glanced at Warren with a raised eyebrow. Do you dance, Mr. Keller? She asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. Not in a very long time, he admitted, and it's still Warren. Warren, she corrected herself, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. Would you make an exception tonight? He hesitated only briefly before standing and offering his hand. For you, Miss Garner, I believe I would. Felicity, she said, placing her hand in his. If I'm to call you Warren, then you must call me Felicity. Felicity, he repeated, savoring the name as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. It took a few moments for Warren to remember the steps, but his body recalled what his mind had forgotten. Soon they were moving smoothly around the room, Felicity following his lead with natural grace. You dance well for someone out of practice, she commented, looking up at him with a smile. Had a good teacher, Warren replied. My wife. He stopped abruptly, surprised at himself for mentioning Eliza in such a moment. But Felicity didn't look uncomfortable. Instead, her expression was understanding. Tell me about her, she said gently as they continued to waltz. If you'd like to. Warren was silent for several turns around the room, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for Felicity. She loved dancing, and Christmas, and spring wildflowers. The words came easier than he expected. She had a laugh that could brighten the darkest day, was terrible at baking bread, but made perfect pies, could calm the most skittish horse with just her voice. Felicity listened, her eyes never leaving his face. "She sounds wonderful," she said when he fell silent. "She was," Warren agreed. Then, after a moment, "I think she would have liked you." Felicity's step faltered slightly, surprise and something deeper flickering across her face. "That's... Thank you for saying that, Warren." The music ended, but they remained standing close together, hands still joined. Warren became acutely aware of the warmth of Felicity's hand in his, the faint scent of lavender that surrounded her, the way the firelight caught golden highlights in her copper hair. The moment was broken when Noah launched into another lively tune, and Levi called for everyone to join a group dance. The evening continued with more music, singing, and stories, but Warren found his gaze continually drawn to Felicity as she moved among her guests, laughing and ensuring everyone's comfort. When the gathering finally broke up late in the evening, Warren lingered, helping Felicity clear away dishes while the Thornton brothers saw their guests home. "It was a wonderful evening," he said as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "Thank you for inviting me." "I'm glad you came," Felicity replied, her hands busy with drying a plate. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." Warren placed the last clean cup on the shelf and turned to find Felicity standing closer than he expected. In the quiet kitchen, with the sounds of the party faded away, an intimate atmosphere enveloped them. "I should go," he said softly, though he made no move toward the door. "It's late," Felicity countered. "And cold. The guest room is made up." Warren hesitated. Staying the night at Felicity's ranch, even in a separate room, seemed like crossing a boundary he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. Reading his expression, Felicity added quickly, "The Thorntons stay over sometimes when the weather's bad or work runs late. It's nothing improper." Warren felt a flush of embarrassment. "I didn't mean to imply—" "I know," Felicity interrupted with a small smile. I'd worry about you riding home so late in this cold." The genuine concern in her voice decided him. "All right. Thank you." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Warren woke in the unfamiliar guest room, momentarily disoriented before remembering where he was. The smell of coffee and baking drew him downstairs after he'd dressed. Felicity was alone in the kitchen, her hair loose around her shoulders, humming as she removed a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven. She looked up as Warren entered, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Merry Christmas," she greeted him. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." "Merry Christmas," Warren replied, accepting the cup she offered. "Where are the Thorntons?" "They rode out early to check on the cattle. This cold snap has me worried about the stock." Felicity placed a generous cinnamon roll on a plate for Warren. "They'll be back for dinner later." They ate breakfast together, the conversation easy and comfortable. Afterward, Felicity disappeared briefly, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I have something for you," she said, suddenly seeming shy as she placed it before him. "Felicity, I didn't—" Warren began, embarrassed that he hadn't thought to bring her a gift. "I don't expect anything in return," she interrupted firmly. "Please, open it." Warren carefully untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "I noticed your old one was rather threadbare," Felicity explained. "The blue matches your eyes." Warren ran his fingers over the soft wool, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gift and the hours of work it represented. "It's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Felicity's cheeks were pink, whether from the heat of the kitchen or something else. Warren couldn't tell. "I wish I had something for you," he said, genuinely regretful. Felicity shook her head. "You've given me plenty these past weeks, your help with the cattle, fixing the pump, Advice about 100 different ranch matters. She hesitated, then added softly, and your company. That's been gift enough. Warren looked at her across the table. This remarkable woman who had somehow brought light back into his dark world. In that moment, he made a decision. Would you ride with me? He asked. There's somewhere I'd like to take you. Curiosity lit Felicity's eyes. Now? If you're willing, it's not far. An hour later, they crested the hill overlooking Warren's property. He led Felicity to the highest point, where a simple wooden cross marked Eliza's grave. Fresh snow had dusted the ground, but Warren had been there recently enough that the path was visible. Felicity drew her horse to a stop beside his, understanding immediately what this place was. Warren, she said softly. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted gently. I need to. They dismounted, and Warren led Felicity to stand before the grave. He stood silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, while Felicity waited patiently beside him. I haven't brought anyone here before, he said finally. Not even for the funeral. I couldn't bear to have others witness my grief. He took a deep breath. But Eliza deserves to be remembered by more than just me. She loved this land. Loved our life here. Felicity's gloved hand found his and squeezed gently. Thank you for sharing this with me. Warren turned to face her, still holding her hand. The day you brought me soup, I was barely living. Just existing. I'd been that way for a year. He swallowed hard. You changed that, Felicity. You reminded me that life goes on, that there can be warmth and purpose again. Tears glistened in Felicity's eyes. Warren. I'm not ready to say certain things yet, he continued, his voice low and intense. It's too soon, and I need to be sure. But I wanted you to know that you've helped me heal in ways I didn't think possible. A tear slipped down Felicity's cheek. I never intended to replace her, she whispered. I wouldn't want to. I know, Warren said. That's part of why I care for you. You never tried to erase my past or rush my grief. You just offered friendship and soup. His lips quirked in a small smile at the memory. Felicity laughed softly through her tears. Mama always said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach. Your mother was a wise woman. Warren reached up to gently brush a tear from Felicity's cheek. I don't know what happens next, but I'd like to find out. If you're willing. In answer, Felicity stepped closer and gently laid her head against his chest. Warren's arms came around her naturally, holding her close as the winter sun shone down on them and on Eliza's final resting place. It felt right, somehow. Not an ending, but a new beginning. Warren dropped a kiss on top of Felicity's head, feeling a peace he hadn't known in over a year. As winter deepened, Warren and Felicity's relationship blossomed. They settled into a pattern of visiting each other's ranches, sharing meals, and working together on various projects. The people of the nearby town took notice, and while some whispered about the propriety of a widow and a single woman spending so much time together, most were simply happy to see Warren Keller returning to the land of the living. January brought a bitter, cold snap that had both ranchers working tirelessly to keep their livestock alive. Warren found himself staying over at Felicity's ranch for several nights when a particularly vicious storm made travel between the properties impossible. He slept in the guest room, of course, but the domesticity of sharing breakfast and dinner with Felicity daily, of working alongside her to care for the animals, felt right in a way he hadn't expected. When the weather finally broke, Warren returned to his own ranch reluctantly. The cabin that had been his home for 15 years suddenly felt empty and cold without Felicity's presence. February brought Valentine's Day, a holiday Warren had never paid much attention to even when Eliza was alive. But this year, he found himself riding into town to the general store, where he purchased a small silver brooch shaped like a rose. It wasn't fancy, nothing like the elaborate jewelry he'd seen in city shop windows, but its simple beauty reminded him of Felicity. He presented it to her over dinner at his cabin, a meal he'd actually taken pains to prepare properly. "It's not much," he said gruffly as she opened the small box. "But it made me think of you." Felicity's face lit up as she lifted the brooch from its nest of cotton. "Warren, it's beautiful," she breathed, immediately pinning it to her dress. "Thank you." Later that evening, as they sat before the fire, Felicity turned to him with determined eyes. "I have something to ask you," she said, her voice carrying a hint of nervousness unusual for her. Warren set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "The Thornton brothers are leaving next month," she said. "Their sister in Texas is ailing, and they need to go help with her children. They've given me fair notice, but—" She twisted her hands in her lap. "I'll need to hire new hands, and good ones are hard to find this time of year." Warren nodded, waiting for the question. "I was wondering," Felicity continued, her words coming faster now, "if you might consider combining our operations. Not, not permanently, necessarily, but for now. Your ranch and mine working together, sharing hands, combining herds for the spring drive to market." Warren studied her face in the firelight. "That's a practical proposition," he said carefully. "Would make sense for both of us." Felicity nodded, her eyes still holding his. "Purely practical," she agreed, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "And how would we manage the living arrangements in this practical arrangement?" Warren asked, his voice low. A flush crept up Felicity's neck. "That would depend," she said carefully, "on what would be most efficient." Warren set his cup aside and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Felicity," he said gently, taking her hands in his, "are you asking me what I think you're asking?" She took a deep breath. "I care for you, Warren, more than I perhaps should, given how recently we've known each other. And I hope you feel something for me too." "I do," Warren confirmed, squeezing her hands. "But Felicity, I want to be sure, for both our sakes." "I'm not asking for declarations or promises," she said quickly. "Just a step forward, a chance to see if what we feel could grow into something lasting." Warren brought one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Very much." The relief on Felicity's face was palpable. "So you'll consider the arrangement? Combining our operations?" "I'll do more than consider it," Warren said. "But let's take it slow. Start with the herds. See how that goes. The rest will follow in its own time." Felicity's smile was radiant. "That sounds perfect." March brought the first signs of spring to Montana, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, longer days, and the birth of new calves. Warren and Felicity had indeed combined their herds for practical purposes, with Warren splitting his time between both properties. They hired 3 new hands together, experienced men who didn't bat an eye at taking orders from a female rancher. The arrangement worked better than either had anticipated, with the larger combined operation running more efficiently than either ranch had individually. As for their personal relationship, it deepened with each passing day. Warren found himself opening up more about Eliza, sharing stories and memories without the crushing grief that had once accompanied them. Felicity listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions but never pushing for more than he was ready to give. In turn, she shared more about her own life, her years teaching in Kansas, her dreams for the ranch, her sadness at never having known her uncle better. "He wrote to me regularly," she explained one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Always included news clippings about successful female ranchers or businesswomen. I think he was trying to tell me something, but I was too focused on my teaching career to see it." "He wanted you to have options," Warren suggested, "like your mother did." Felicity nodded thoughtfully. I think you're right. And in the end, he gave me the greatest option of all independence and my own land. She smiled softly. And indirectly, he led me to you. Warren reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. I'm grateful to him for that. April brought heavy rains and the final preparations for the spring cattle drive to the railhead in Helena. The combined herd numbered nearly 300 head, the largest drive either rancher had undertaken. The night before they were set to leave, Warren and Felicity sat at her kitchen table, finalizing plans. 3 of their hired hands would drive the cattle, while Warren and Felicity would ride ahead to negotiate prices with the buyers. We should reach Helena by the 3rd day if the weather holds, Warren said, tracing the route on the map spread between them. Felicity nodded, making notes in her ledger. And we'll stay at the Grand Hotel? There was a hint of excitement in her voice. Warren smiled, understanding her anticipation. Neither of them had enjoyed much luxury in recent years. Yes, I've already sent a telegram to reserve rooms. Plural? Felicity asked, a teasing glint in her eye. Warren felt heat creep up his neck. Despite the deepening of their relationship, they had maintained certain proprieties. Felicity, he began carefully. She laughed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. I'm teasing you, Warren. Separate rooms is proper and expected. He turned his hand to capture hers. For now, he said quietly, meeting her eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken promises. Finally, Felicity nodded, her expression soft. For now, she agreed. The cattle drive went smoothly, with only minor challenges along the way. When they reached Helena, Warren and Felicity secured excellent prices for their stock, better than either had hoped for. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name, offering comforts neither had experienced in years: hot baths, fine dining, and actual mattresses instead of bedrolls. After dinner in the hotel restaurant, they strolled through the town, window shopping and enjoying the novelty of city life. Outside a jeweler's shop, Felicity paused, her attention caught by the display of rings. Warren followed her gaze, noting which ones drew her interest: simple bands with modest stones, nothing ostentatious. Beautiful craftsmanship? Felicity commented, unaware of Warren's thoughtful observation. Indeed, he agreed, filing away the information for future reference. Their last night in Helena, Warren arranged a surprise. He hired a carriage to take them to a small restaurant on the outskirts of town, known for its excellent food and privacy. They dined by candlelight, talking about the successful drive and their plans for expanding the herd further with their profits. As they finished dessert, a decadent chocolate cake that had Felicity closing her eyes in pleasure, Warren reached across the table for her hand. I have something I want to say, he began, his voice more serious than it had been all evening. Felicity set down her fork, giving him her full attention. I'm listening. Warren took a deep breath. When Eliza died, I thought my life was over. I was just going through the motions, waiting to die myself. He squeezed her hand gently. And then, you appeared on my doorstep with soup. Felicity smiled at the memory, though her eyes were growing misty. You brought warmth back into my life, Warren continued. Not just the soup, though that was the beginning. You brought purpose and laughter, and eventually, love. Felicity's breath caught audibly at the word. I love you, Felicity Garner, Warren said, the words he'd been holding back for months finally spoken aloud. I didn't think I could love again after Eliza, but I do. Differently, but just as deeply. Tears spilled onto Felicity's cheeks. Oh, Warren, she whispered. I love you too. I think I have since that Christmas Eve when you danced with me. Warren stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest diamond, similar to those she had admired in Helena. "I know it might seem soon to some, but I'm certain of my feelings, and I believe you are too." Felicity stared at the ring, then at Warren's face. "When did you—" "This afternoon, while you were shopping for fabric," he admitted with a small smile. "Will you marry me, Felicity? Join our lives and our ranches together properly?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, Warren. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, their first real kiss, sweet and tender and full of promise. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with the Thornton brothers returning briefly from Texas to stand as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Warren's voice strong and sure as he spoke his vows, and Felicity radiant in a new blue dress that matched the Montana sky. The reception was held at what would now be their shared ranch, the larger of the two properties, with the more comfortable house. Friends and neighbors from miles around came to celebrate, bringing food and good wishes. Music and dancing continued well into the night, with Warren never leaving Felicity's side for long. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Warren found Felicity standing on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. He moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" he murmured against her ear. Felicity turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "Incredibly happy," she assured him, stretching up to kiss him softly. Later that night, in what was now their bedroom, Warren held Felicity close, marveling at how life could change so completely in the space of months, from the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from isolation to loving partnership. "What are you thinking?" Felicity asked, her voice drowsy as she nestled against him. Warren pressed a kiss to her hair. "That I'm grateful," he said simply, "for soup and second chances, and you." Felicity laughed softly. "Mama always did say soup could heal almost anything." "Your mother," Warren replied, tightening his arms around his wife, "was a very wise woman." 5 years later, Warren stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Felicity led their 3-year-old daughter Elizabeth around the garden, pointing out the names of flowers and vegetables. Their son Thomas, just learning to walk, toddled after them determinedly, his chubby legs working overtime to keep up. The combined ranch, now officially named the Double K, had prospered beyond their expectations. With Warren's experience and Felicity's innovative approach to breeding, their cattle operation was one of the most successful in the territory. They'd added sheep 2 years ago, another of Felicity's ideas that had proven profitable. The sound of a wagon approaching drew Warren's attention. He shaded his eyes against the setting sun to see Noah Thornton, now married and settled on neighboring land, bringing his wife and new baby for dinner. "Felicity," Warren called, "the Thorntons are here." His wife looked up, waving to their approaching friends before scooping Thomas into her arms and taking Elizabeth's hand to greet their guests. As Warren watched his family, the family he never thought he'd have after losing Eliza, a profound sense of gratitude washed over him. The grief hadn't disappeared entirely. It never would. On the anniversary of Eliza's death, he still rode to her grave, sometimes alone, sometimes with Felicity, to lay wildflowers and remember. But alongside that grief now existed a deep and abiding joy. A second chance at love and family that had begun with a pot of soup on a cold winter day. Warren stepped off the porch to join his wife and children, thinking as he often did these days that even in the harshest Montana winter, warmth could be found if you opened your door to it. Life on the frontier would never be easy. There would always be blizzards and droughts, difficult births and occasional losses. But facing those challenges with Felicity by his side made all the difference. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone: a thriving ranch, a loving family, a home filled with laughter and warmth. As Warren reached his family, Felicity looked up at him with the same loving smile that had first begun to thaw his frozen heart 5 years ago. He bent to kiss her softly, then lifted Thomas from her arms to allow her to greet their guests properly. "Happy?" he asked quietly, echoing the question he'd asked on their wedding night. Felicity's hand came up to touch his cheek, her eyes reflecting the sunset gold. "Completely," she assured him, "every single day." And in that moment, surrounded by the family and life they had built together, Warren Keller knew that the greatest truth of the frontier wasn't about survival or conquest. It was about resilience and rebirth. The heart's remarkable capacity to heal, to love again, to find joy after sorrow. All it had taken was a woman brave enough to bring soup during a storm,